Hello, everyone, and welcome back. A big welcome to you to the Level Up English podcast. You should be very excited for today's guest because we're talking with Richard Simcott, who, as described on Wikipedia, is a hyperpolyglot. And this is a word I've never heard before until now, and it, I suppose, means that he has studied many languages. He's actively studied about 50 languages, and there are actually some great videos on YouTube that I recommend watching. There's one from italki, for example, where he's being interviewed and he's talking in all these different languages. I do not understand most of them, but they sound supernatural and fluent, and it really is an incredible example of what a language learner can do, especially when you have the passion for language learning, as Richard does. In the episode today, we talk a lot about language learning. Of course, it would be a waste if we didn't. So we talk about techniques to learn a language. We talk about some embarrassing mistakes that Richard has made before, a really funny one that I enjoyed. We speak a little bit about the Cornish language as well, because that's something that I'm interested in. Cornish is the Celtic language from my hometown in the southwest of the UK. And Richard's learning that. I thought that was interesting because it's not a very common language. Not many people know about it. I asked him about his technique when it comes to studying a language with few resources. So you might learn a little bit about how to study a language, or at least what Richard does to do it anyway. I also asked Richard to respond to some common excuses that language learners have. Many language learners use these things as reasons as to why they cannot study or they cannot succeed. And I asked Richard to help me debunk some of them today, which means prove them wrong. And then finally, on the bonus podcast this week, we talk a little bit about the routine, the study routine of a polyglot. And Richard shares a bit about his routine. It's a really interesting episode. And honestly, I still had so many questions I wanted to ask, and maybe he'll be kind enough to join us for a part 2 in the future, but I think you will enjoy it anyway. Richard's website is speakingfluently.com, so I recommend you check out his website, speakingfluently.com, if you want to hear more about him, you want some language learning tips and some stories, and learn more about what it means to be a polyglot and know or learn so many languages. If you want to know more, Richard is from the UK, from the north of England, and is currently living in North Macedonia. And on his website at the moment, there are some great blog posts. I'll read a couple titles now, including, "Can Duolingo make you fluent?" That's a very good question. There's another blog post about advice on starting a new language with Richard. That's going to be really useful to read, I think. There's another blog post about learning Cornish, which I am particularly interested in, and one more about learning English using TikTok. So check out some of the amazing blog posts over on his website, speakingfluently.com. Sometimes the audio and the microphone was a little bit bad, so parts of the episode may be hard to hear. If that's the case, the transcript will definitely help. I go through the transcript manually to make sure everything is correct. It's 99.9% correct. So if you do have trouble, you can read along the transcripts while you listen. And remember, transcripts are available for Level Up members. Click on the link in your podcast show notes to become a member, access the transcripts, and much more. But for now, let's get into the main episode. Hope you enjoy it, and I will see you maybe in the comments section on the show notes. I'd love to hear your feedback over there. Let's get into it. Hello, everyone. I am happy today to be joined by Richard Simcott. So thank you very much for joining me. How are you doing?
Thank you very much for having me on the podcast. I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Still feeling early for me. I'm a bit sleepy-eyed, but I'm happy to be here with you now. So you mentioned just before we started recording, you are in Macedonia now, is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So I live in Skopje, and officially the country changed its name to North Macedonia. So in terms of international agreements, but yes, Skopje is the capital, so that's where I am at the moment.
Okay, I love that part of Europe. I've been around a lot of those countries. I've never been to Macedonia or
Mm-hmm.
North Macedonia. It's maybe next on my list. How long have you been there? Because
Mm-hmm.
I assume you're from the UK originally.
Yeah, originally from the UK. I've been backwards and forwards here for about 20 years, and so it's been a long relationship with the Balkans, this part of the world, and so I guess sort of more full time over in the Balkans. It's been about 13 years or so.
You said 13?
Yeah,
Wow,
13. Yeah.
long time, long time. Is there anything that you miss about home at the moment? About, maybe your definition of home has changed, but is there anything you miss about the UK now?
Um, Obviously, I mean, it's where I'm originally from, so you still kind of have that desire to see places that you grew up seeing and people and friends and family and things like that. And certain things that you get that you don't get here, of course. But I've got to say that I've made my home in the Balkans, and this is home. So I don't really miss it to the point that I would want to go back full time to the UK. But there are definitely things that I enjoy about all parts of the world and even countries that I've lived in aside from the UK and the Balkans. So, so yeah, I mean, parts of it, yeah, parts of it. eh.
Yeah, I think that's a good attitude. Everywhere has a good side and bad side, so there's always something to miss, I suppose.
Exactly. Mm,
Yeah, well,
exactly.
I imagine some of the listeners might already be familiar with you, maybe because I feel like you've been around on the internet quite a lot. I've seen you in many places, random YouTube videos and Instagram and stuff like that. And you're quite a prolific language learner. Is that the best way? A polyglot, right?
So yeah, I think probably a very highly motivated, passionate language learner is probably one of the better descriptions because it's one of my main hobbies that I really enjoy, and I've enjoyed learning languages for many, many years since I was very young, and continue to learn languages to this day, and hope to continue learning for many more years.
Yeah, it's amazing. I kind of want to tap into that a bit today and ask you about your motivations and stuff.
Mhm.
I believe I read on your website you've learned over 50 languages. Is that right?
Yeah, so I mean, I've studied to different degrees, obviously, because you can't study everything about any language. I mean, even our own languages. So obviously varying degrees of how much I've studied, but I've studied over 50 for sure. I'm not sure exactly how many because it's been so many years and you forget some things. But yeah, it's been quite a lot, and some of those are in formal education. So I have a degree in 4 languages. I have an advanced diploma in another, and then I've lived in a number of countries and worked through other languages as well. So there are lots of different courses I've done in between all of that too. So it sort of very quickly adds up over, a good, what is it, maybe 40 years that I've been studying. I started when I was about 5 or so. So it's been a while. Yeah.
You make it sound easy. Oh, it just adds up. It's not a big deal. But
It kind of does though. It's very weird because when people hear the sort of the number 50 or more, it sounds crazy, and I guess at first sight and at first sort of my first hearing, it sounds a bit strange to say, oh, how on earth do you study that many languages? And the thing is when you study language families and language groups, as I've done as well, my focus has been on the Germanic, Romance, and Slavic language groups primarily. And so it's amazing how you can get to 10 or more languages just in one family of languages. And the differences really aren't that big. So really you're looking at what's slightly different as opposed to what's new. So if you studied Czech and Polish, studying Slovak isn't a case of learning a whole new language. It's a case of learning what's different and a bit of what's new.
Okay, I always wondered whether that would be actually harder because they are so similar, or easier. But that's interesting. So it's almost like a kind of stepping stone from one to the other using those similarities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually wrote down a question here that I would love to get your opinion on. This is a would you rather. So, would you rather be fluent in one foreign language, 100%, if that,
Mhm.
let's say that's possible, or know 100 languages to 10%? So you can do like basic greetings and, where is the hotel, where is the bathroom, but not much more. What would be your preference in that scenario?
I'm going to be the annoying person on your podcast now and say I don't see that as an either or. I see that as a would you like to do that and that? Because I've often come across this, particularly with people who get very into a particular language and culture in academia, and because they've got to this sort of depth of knowledge, which is absolutely admirable, and I've met a number of people in that kind of position. What I find is some people feel that they then need to be able to reproduce that in every other language. The real truth is you don't. It doesn't take away from the language knowledge that you have in that depth by studying another however many languages at a more superficial level. What it does sometimes is actually helps to add to your understanding of languages that would uh, sort of cross over into the sphere of knowledge that you've already gained by that in-depth study. So, for example, if you were to study, um, let's say Spanish or French, and then you learn certain words, like for example in Spanish you learn how to say I live in a place, for example, and then you learn Portuguese to a basic level. One of the first verbs you'll learn is to live, which is morar in Portuguese. Now that verb is known if you've got a very good knowledge of Spanish. You'll know that morar is used also in Spanish in a sense of to dwell, and it would be used in poetry and things like that. So very quickly you can start to see how these languages intersect, and there's a real beauty in sort of getting that awareness. So I think there's something very nice about going deep into a language or a couple of languages. I mean, my degree was in 4 languages, and I had to write dissertations in 3 of them. So you go fairly far in a degree. Obviously, it's not a PhD where you're doing research on some obscure terminology or vocabulary from literature in the 18th century or something like that. But still, you're going quite far into the language, and so I think you can do that and do the other stuff. So I'd rather do what I've done and choose my own path.
Okay, I like it. I like it. It's not what I expected, but I think that's a great answer for sure. I mean, it's very clear to me that are, you have a lot of passion and interest in the languages, which I'm sure helps, motivate you to go and learn them. But of course, my audience is pretty much all English learners as a second language, and a question I get a lot from them is the problem of motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And they say, I don't have enough motivation. I don't find it that enjoyable to study English. I wondered if you had any advice or any ways that you find motivation yourself on learning all these languages.
So, I mean, a motivation for learning multiple languages and motivation for learning a language is going to be slightly different, because I don't know if you necessarily would go and do what I've done if you don't have that motivation to start with. Um, so I think probably answering the question of people learning a language, whether it's English or whether it's one other language or something else, the key really is finding things that chime with you, things that resonate, things that excite you. So finding people who enjoy the topics and hobbies and topics that you don't want to talk about, for example, or things that you like to explore in that language, and finding kind of your tribe, but in that language, is always a really nice way of doing it. So it could be podcasts on a certain topic that you enjoy talking about. And what you'll find is that the grammar is the grammar of the language, and it tends to be used in various contexts. The vocabulary also, in a weird way, you'll see vocabulary used in one place, and then it will be replicated for a different use potentially, or a slightly different use in another. So if you can feel motivated to listen to or learn about or talk to people who are interested in the same things as you, whether that's astronomy, history, religion, spirituality, LGBTQ plus issues, whatever it is that you're into, you can start to talk and get that knowledge and find your tribe in whichever group. And it could even be more than one tribe, right? You could be interested in biology and also DIY. So find your podcasts that talk about those types of topics, because at least then you're interested also in the content, and the language is just a tool to get you further.
Yeah, I love that. I try to do that when I can. A technique that I've had before is like thinking about what I do in my life anyway and just trying to do it in
Mhm.
another language, whether that's like reading a recipe online or doing a workout video on YouTube or something like that. And I find that quite a motivating and fun way to do it.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think that's great. Connecting it with something that you're passionate about rather
Absolutely.
than just brute forcing your way into the language, right?
Absolutely, because I mean, the natural sort of propensity for us as individuals is to go and to study, or something that they naturally want to do, and so if the language is lacking that oomph, it's definitely needs to be combined with other things. I mean, we've got to remember as well, languages are many things, but the sort of the overriding thing that they are for most people on the planet is actually a language as a tool to communicate and to connect with other people. And so that's why it's important to have that connection through things that you're drawn to.
I think that's when it starts getting fun as well, isn't it? Because I
Yeah.
know a lot of my listeners seem to be quite shy. I feel like I'm quite a shy person too, most of the
Mhm.
time. And I try to talk a lot about overcoming shyness because language learning gets so much more fun when you can step out of your comfort zone and meet people, talk to people, and try to overcome the shyness a little bit. So I think there's some huge benefits there for sure.
Absolutely.
Where are you from in the UK, by the way?
So I'm originally from the border of England and Wales. I grew up around Chester, and my family's actually Welsh and Scouse. So my original dialect of English is Scouse, and but also I had Welsh words in my English growing up, and I also reclaimed that heritage language later to actually communicate properly in Welsh. So
That's
yeah.
interesting because I wanted to ask you. This is kind of for selfish reasons. I don't know how much of my audience cares, but I'm from Cornwall, so I was really
hmm
interested to hear that you're learning Cornish,
hmm
or at least you have been learning Cornish at some point.
Yeah.
I imagine maybe did it come? You learned Welsh first, and then you kind of got inspired to learn Cornish, or how did that come about for you?
Very interesting reason why I'm learning Cornish actually. So I had a retirement plan that I would get more into the Celtic languages after I retired. That was my idea in the very beginning. And then COVID hit, and as you say, I already spoke Welsh, and I've spoken Welsh for many years now, and always had Welsh in my vocabulary anyway. But with Cornish, I'd looked at it. I hadn't really considered learning it in really seriously, and a friend of mine was interested in learning it. She'd been on a few Cornish language weekend retreats and things like that, and there was with the pandemic, some Cornish classes came online. She said, "Do you fancy joining one of these classes with me, and we'll learn it together?" And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, sure, let's go for it." So I thought, in for a penny, in for a pound. I signed up and joined this Cornish class online. and I actually really enjoyed it. She had some changes at work and could no longer she could no longer carry on with the Cornish learning herself. But I had already at this point really felt invested in the language, and I got to know the people in the group, and I just carried on. And then I sat my grade 1 exam and passed that, and signed up for grade 2 and passed that. And now I'm studying for my grade 3 exam. There are 4 grades in Cornish that you
Oh,
can
okay, so
do.
you're doing well then.
So it's weird because I guess it's around about a B1-ish level,
Wow,
if you're
that's
talking about.
impressive for a language with so few resources, though.
Surprisingly not that crazy with the resources in terms of you'd imagine that it would be quite difficult, but I even wrote a blog post about this on my blog just to sort of show what the things that I'd found. And I found that the Cornish language community has been very, very welcoming and very open and very supportive in the learning of Cornish. And in fact, for a language that you'd imagine, with we're talking hundreds of fluent speakers, maybe about 500 or so, fluent speakers, um, and then maybe a few thousand learners. It's interesting that I have 3 conversation groups a week in Cornish online, and then they have them in person as well. And they have Cornish language weekends, and they have all these really cool things going on. The very odd thing is, I've never been to Cornwall.
Really? Wow. Oh, you have to let me know if you do. I'll give you a tour or something. But
Yeah, that'd be lovely.
because my next question was going to be if you've actually used it in Cornwall, because
Oh, really?
I, I'm from East Cornwall, so generally West Cornwall is where you get more Cornish, right?
Mhm.
But I don't think I've ever seen anyone speaking Cornish in real life before. It's only been on the internet. I've never seen it spoken. I do quite enjoy walking around, and I'm learning it from the signs.
Mhm.
You get a lot of house names as well, which like Chian something,
Mhm.
and you learn a new word with the house. But okay, I'll be interested to hear if you ever do go, then you can have a practice with someone. Let me know how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that'd be really cool. I mean, there were groups around, St Austell, for example. There are a few people that go and meet up and speak, but there are other parts of Cornwall where as well. I think they had a meetup in Truro, I think, not long ago. But yeah, absolutely, be my pleasure. it was, it's, I very much want to go. I've got this kind of almost half joke in my head that I will complete all of the Cornish level exams and end up going there for my bardic ceremony for the
That's
first
fun.
time. So what are you doing in Cornwall? Well, I'm here for my bardic ceremony for the Cornish language. But it's kind of half a joke, but part of me thinks that actually could happen, that I will get through all of the grades before I get to go. I just because yeah, because Cornwall's not a kind of on the way destination. It's your final destination, right? And so a trip to the UK for me normally means a trip to the north west of England and then Wales, but it doesn't usually take in other parts of the country or other countries in the UK. And if I do stop off anywhere, it'll usually be somewhere like London because that's kind of a point of entry, and you drive up or get a train up or something.
Yeah, it's a bit of an awkward place to get to in some sense, especially from Wales. I'm going to Wales soon, and it's like 5 hours, which doesn't sound crazy, but you have to go like all the way out east and then back west again, and it's a bit of a pain.
Yeah.
But okay, well that's interesting to hear. I'm glad to hear about that. I know I should have said this at the beginning. This is my fault, but in case any listeners are not sure what we're talking about, Cornish and Welsh. These are both. Correct me if I'm saying it wrong, but native languages to the British Isles that, in a sense, predate English. Right? Would you agree?
Yeah, so they're Celtic languages. They're both, so the Celtic languages themselves split off into 2 branches. We've got the Gaelic and the Brythonic. And the Gaelic is kind of where you've got Irish, Scottish Gaelic, and Manx. So they're the 3 that we have on that side. And on the Brythonic side, we have Welsh, Cornish, and we used to have Cumbric. It used to be a language that was spoken in Cumbria, but it only survives in remnants now. And then there's a language from the same family that's closely related to Cornish as well in France called Breton. And those languages are to a degree mutually intelligible, not completely, but to a degree. And the same is true for the other side of the Celtic languages. But a Cornish speaker and a Welsh speaker would not be able to naturally just understand a Gaelic speaker or an Irish speaker or a Manx speaker. They're just too far apart. You would get maybe the odd word if you listened very, very carefully, but you're not going to follow any type of conversation or have any meaningful interactions with them without first studying those languages. But with Welsh and Cornish, Welsh definitely helps in learning Cornish for sure.
I've noticed a few similarities. Like I've got a friend who speaks Welsh, and like I hear some words that ring a bell to me or sound familiar. So yeah, that's interesting. I could talk about this for the whole episode, but I have other things I want to talk about that the listeners may actually be more interested in too, because I don't know how many of them want to hear about Cornish, but I do anyway. I wanted to ask you about some common excuses I get for people who cannot learn or don't want to learn or find it difficult to learn a language. And I want to get your opinion on these excuses and wonder if you have an answer to them. We'll see how many we can get through. I've got a list here, but one of them is I'm afraid of making mistakes. Or another way to say it is I'm not ready to talk yet. I get a lot of people saying I want to improve my English so I can be ready to talk with someone, because at the moment I'm not ready. I'm too afraid. How would you respond to that excuse? Is that a valid one?
I mean, psychologically, people are allowed to feel worried and concerned, and that's fine to feel that way. The thing I would say is that if you feel that way and you want to improve your ability to speak the language, not speaking the language is a decision that you take based on how you feel. The result of which is that you do not get the practice you need to make the improvements that you desire. And so if you seriously want to improve and you don't do anything about it, you can't expect any improvement. So you have to reassess how important that goal is for you against how uncomfortable you feel about speaking. So if the goal is more important than how uncomfortable you feel, then you have to get out of your comfort zone and speak, because you're not going to improve without practicing.
I love the simplicity of that. It's just comparing those two things and seeing what's more important to you. Yeah. So obviously for you, it has been, well, maybe not obvious. I mean, have you had to overcome shyness or anything like that to get to where you are?
I'm not a particularly shy person, but I have met people who are, and I've spoken to them, and I understand that it's not easy. The fear of making mistakes, I think, is something that kicks in from probably around 7, when we're at school and our peers become more important to us than, say, parents or whatever else, because their opinions start to matter, and we want to fit in and we want to see the same. We don't want to seem different, and these are all psychological barriers that we start to build from about the age of 7, roughly. And they sort of get more and more complex, and they add to our uniqueness as individuals. The thing is we need to recognize actually where they come from and what they are, and analyze, whether or not we can get over some of those barriers by starting to break them down by doing things that are not the actions and behaviors, patterns, particularly, that we have formed because of those barriers. And it's quite a big thing to take on. It sounds easier than it is, but it takes a lot of self reflection and awareness to be able to do that. And the thing that many people will say is that, I don't want to make mistakes because I don't make mistakes in my own language. Well, yes, you do. You make mistakes in your own language. I don't even need to listen to you, hear you, or speak to you to tell you that you do. You're never going to speak any language perfectly 100% of the time. I make mistakes in English, it doesn't mean I don't know it. It just means that I'm a human being. And so how are you not going to make a mistake in another language? As a child, for example, I mean, let's take English as the language of speaking. A child will learn English and people will say, oh, they learn it so quickly. No, they have years and years of getting it wrong. And they get it wrong and continue to get it wrong into adulthood. And what they'll say is things like, I seed it. And they went, I saw it. But you have to keep repeating that over and over again before they internalize the repetition of the correct standardized form of the language and have that as an automatic response to I saw instead of I seed. So if you imagine that it took you that long to learn your first language and to make these mistakes and to get it wrong and be corrected constantly, you also have to go through that process with any other language. The good news for you is that as an adult, you have a grammar already in your brain that you can draw on as a reference point. So you're actually in a better situation than the children who are learning from the first language because they have no reference point whatsoever. They have to learn everything. Everything is new. Whereas you are in the very fortunate position to be able to just start speaking from this reference point and understand when things are correct or incorrect from the feedback in a much faster way than a child.
Yeah, people often say that babies and children they've got the brain for language learning. They can learn much better than us. But I do think that a lot of it is just the willingness to make mistakes and not care about making mistakes. And I think if adults were the same and we said something wrong 100 times until we got it right, I think we would learn so much faster, wouldn't we? I think that's a huge part of it.
It's the psychological barriers because children don't have those until, as I say, until about the age of 7 when the peers become more important to them. That's why they always say, teach a child for a second language before the age of 7. It's a lot easier. But when you get past the age of 7, with every year it gets more difficult, more challenging. And the reason is because of the social relationships that they have with other people, with their peers particularly, and not wanting to sound different or funny or strange, and to be perceived as being normal. And that's just one of the things, unfortunately, that in society, normal is this prized thing that doesn't lead to very much of anything. It's just, it constrains us and keeps us trapped. So yeah, I embrace your weirdness, embrace your difference, embrace your oddness, embrace your willingness to look a bit silly sometimes, because that's what will spur you on. That's what will make you memories of mistakes that you want to improve on. Because if you don't have a funny story to tell about your mistakes, where are you going?
Yeah, you're talking to me here. This is something I really need to hear as well because it's hard to get out of that mindset of trying to be perfect and stuff. This might be another tangent, but I did actually also want to ask you, now that you've mentioned it, do you have like a funny story or embarrassing mistake that comes to mind? Maybe you messed up in a language before you were learning and it resulted in a really funny situation. I don't know if you have anything like that in mind.
I kind of do. I mean, I lived in a family in Germany after I graduated university for a summer, and I studied about a month of German before I moved in with a family, and I was au pairing for 3 young girls, and I was sitting at the table every single day. I'd use this phrase in German, "Ich will ins Klo," and I thought I was saying I need to go to the toilet, right? Or I want to go to the toilet, right? What I was actually saying, and then one day, a month after I'd been saying this almost on a daily basis, the dad looked at me and started laughing because my German had been improving. This mistake had stayed, right? So it was no longer a mistake that was appropriate for my level of German after the month. So he thought it was funny at this point. He said, what, are you going to go and swim? Because I was actually saying, I want to go and jump into the toilet bowl. Like, basically, I want to go in the toilet. And I was like, I started laughing really hard as well. And I said, I can't believe I've been saying this every day for the last month. and now you tell me? Like, what are my chances of correcting this mistake? It's almost fossilized. But we laughed so hard, it stuck. And now obviously I'll never say that again. But you know, also I shouldn't have really been saying ich will ins Klo, because Klo is like the toilet itself. So ich will zur Toilette is the correct way of saying it. I want to go to the bathroom, is, in a polite way of saying it. So Klo is it's a little bit, yeah, a bit gross to be saying that you want to go to the actual toilet.
That's a great one. I love that. Yeah, I think it's a British English thing, isn't it? We like to say toilet, meaning the room, but in
Hmm.
other dialects of English, they don't really do that so much. I hear, but that's funny. Yeah, it's. I guess it's good that he eventually corrected you, but I can imagine as a beginner learner, it's not a big deal. You understand, but if you're speaking like really good German and then that's the one thing you say weirdly, that's going to sound very, very funny.
I mean, it is funny, and there are probably things that I still say today in different languages that people haven't corrected me on, because sometimes they find it cute that you say it wrong or say it slightly wrong, and I kind of get that, but it's a little bit annoying. I'd rather be corrected and get it right. Um, I mean, as a serious speaker of some languages, particularly if you want to make a really serious point, the last thing you want are these mistakes that make people giggle. But I get why some people like that. They find it endearing. But yeah, my wife's definitely done that to me in Macedonia before. I can't think of any concrete examples, but and I won't embarrass her. But
I do it to my wife all the time. My wife's Chinese, and she often says like, she says something wrong, and I laugh or I giggle, and she's, "How do you say it? Tell me the right way." And I don't want to tell her because I think it's kind of cute. Like, I don't think she'll mind if I say, but instead of saying like asparagus, she'll say asparagus, like a little
oh,
difference in stress, which I just find kind of cute. I don't want it to change.
yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's funny what's cute and what you want to keep.
I mean,
Why not?
accents are nice. We don't want to have a world with everyone speaking the same accent, do we?
No, absolutely not. And I think some variations are just really, really nice to have in language, even if they're not from the country originally. I think just some ways of saying things and putting things and are just really nice. And sometimes some of these things get adopted into mainstream, right?
Hmm.
Yeah. So why not?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, yeah, definitely embrace it. Let me ask you one more. I don't know how much time we have, but um, I think you might have a good answer for this one. I don't have enough time to learn a language.
Mhm.
What would you say to people who use that as an excuse?
Okay. So why are you starting to learn a language if you don't have enough time? Why do you want to learn? What are you expecting? Um, would be my first question. Are you expecting it to go in by osmosis? Because that's not going to happen. Um, you have to have time to be able to do it if you really want to do it. So if you seriously think that you don't have time, then you're not serious about learning a language. But if you are serious about learning a language, then you have to really start to sit down and identify when you actually do have time, and you do have time during the day to get some language practice or learning in. Now, you're going to need to have at least a couple of sessions a week where you actually actively study something for the language if you're learning it. You can't just expect it to be complete. I'm just going to do this or do that. It may happen for you. It happens to some people, but for many people, they need to read through things, get explanations of things, have things sort of laid out, and to understand it fully, so that it's internalized, and so that you're not spending a gazillion hours reading something in the hope that it comes up again and again and again and again, because you could be reading for years before you really understand a rule or a concept. Sometimes you need a shortcut into this means this. So I would say a couple of hours sort of focusing on things that you want to be able to express, things that you want to say, things that you want to work on, because you know what you need to say and you know what you need to work on in terms of where are your limits in the language. Feel where the walls are in your language. Can I say this? Can I say it as I want to say it? Do I know the vocabulary to be able to express the things that are important to me, because they're the first things that we need to say? And how far can I take that conversation? Once you've sort of analysed that and you've decided what you're going to study and when, As I say, a couple of sessions a week normally is okay to start moving forwards. And I probably up to like 45 minutes, an hour, maybe, if you can fit that in, that'd be fantastic as an ideal. But then you also want to have contact with the language on a daily basis, because otherwise just doing a couple of sessions a week or one session a week is not going to take you very far very quickly, and you'll very quickly feel bored and lack the motivation to continue because you won't see the progress. So what things do you like? Do you like music? Do you like listening to things in the language? Are there certain things that you like to do in the language? People you like to speak to? Are there people online you can communicate with? Are there things that you want to be able to describe or write or read about? And to really identify lists of things that you enjoy doing and then can do with the language. And then it could be as simple as, before I have my breakfast, I will just read the list of new words that I came across in my lesson. It could be 5, 10 words. Don't go too crazy, like 100 words, but it could be something as simple as that. But always make it, before I do this, I will do the study. Because as soon as you say, I will do it after, it's amazing how quickly after becomes after this, after that, after the other. You get to the end of the day, you're very tired and you want to go to bed, and that's understandable. But you go to bed feeling guilty, and you wake up feeling guilty, and then you wake up feeling guilty and feeling that you've missed a day, so what's the point? So now I'll wait for when? Next year? When? New Year's resolutions again? When? So it's important to identify times before another activity that you can do, even if it's 5-10 minutes. Better than nothing. But definitely the study sessions will help to solidify and get things in place and move you forward, as opposed to just relying on 5 minutes a day and you can learn any language. That's not the way it works.
Learn in your sleep.
Yeah, exactly. It is.
That's very familiar, that situation you just described. And I love the idea as well that you said studying regularly, maybe on a daily basis, is going to help build momentum. I know a lot of people who do try just once or twice a week and they find it boring. And I never really thought about it. But yeah, I suppose it's because they're not seeing the progress, and therefore they're not motivated to keep doing it. So actually working harder is going to make it more fun, hopefully, and more momentum will build. That's interesting.
Yeah, and try and do things from memory. Like, the difference I see between very successful language learners and people who struggle a lot is when they think about the language. So actually thinking about things is really important. So find yourself during a day, okay, can I remember the words? Which words did I learn? What was new? What did I learn in that lesson? Try and write down some of the things that you learned. And then you start to see what you didn't learn as well, because it's amazing how the mind is able to remember what you did know and what you didn't know. Oh, I'd forgotten that thing. What was the other thing that I saw? Oh, it was this word, and I can't remember what it is now. And you go back then. As soon as you finish what you're doing and you've got time, you go back and you look at what it is before you start another thing.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I know you've got other things to get to today, so maybe we can finish up here. But before we go, where would you like to send listeners to find out more about you, what else you've got going on, all that stuff?
Yeah, feel free to just come to the speakingfluently.com website, and from there you can see my social media links. I'm much more active on social media than I am on my blog, but I do update every now and again. And then if you ever want to come to an event that I organised the Polyglot Conference, which is open to anyone who loves language. You don't have to be a polyglot. And also another smaller event, which I call the Language Event. And both of them are polyglotconference.com, languageevent.com. And the next one's actually going to be in April in Edinburgh.
I consider going to that then. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, you should definitely come. Yeah,
I love Edinburgh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining me. Really enjoyed your wisdom and your time as well, so appreciate it, and hope we can connect again in the future.
Yeah, that would be a pleasure. Thank you so much.
You have been listening to the Level Up English podcast. If you would like to leave a question to be answered on a future episode, then please go to levelupenglish.school levelupenglish.school/podcast. That's levelupenglish.school/podcast. And I'll answer your question on a future episode. Thanks for listening.